Urgent? While Washington feeds the world with promises, Kyiv and Brussels have moved on to radical pressure on the Kremlin. Europe goes all in. Kallas publicly humiliated the US over Ukraine. A sensational slap in a live broadcast, Ukraine's retribution has hit its target: war, officially in Russian homes. The Russian rear is turning to ashes. Putin himself has opened the gates of hell for his country. Panic in the cities. This is only the beginning before the finale, a conspiracy within the Kremlin walls. A scenario to eliminate the dictator has been launched in Moscow. The elites have started hunting Putin. Those who bowed yesterday are sharpening their knives today. Who will strike the first blow in the back? The army is being ground to dust, an epidemic of self-destruction. Losses are breaking historical records, but the most shocking thing is that Putin's infantry has begun to destroy itself en masse. All this and more in our program Hotspot. It's begun. Europe has rebelled. Kaja Kallas humiliated the United States, looking them straight in the face. While Washington hesitates, Kyiv and Brussels are showing the whole world how to truly destroy the Kremlin. The masks are off. European leaders are no longer going to remain silent. A scandal at the highest levels. Kaja Kallas slapped Marco Rubio in the face. Watch for all the details. The US and Europe have entered into a real confrontation over the war in Ukraine. At the G7 meeting, European diplomatic chief Kallas and US Secretary of State Rubio exchanged sharp statements. Kallas criticized the US for the fact that a year has passed and nothing has changed. When will their patience with Russia finally run out?
This is a typical Russian negotiation tactic to demand what never belonged to them. And this is a trap we should not fall into. If we, together with the Americans, put pressure on Russia, we can end the war in Ukraine and establish a lasting, durable peace. We see that Russia is helping Iran with intelligence to carry out strikes and kill Americans, as well as assisting with drones for attacks on neighboring countries and American military bases. If the Americans want to stop the war, they need to put pressure on the Russians so they can't help Iran.
Rubio replied that they've already done a lot, and if the Europeans think they know better, they can try it themselves. He essentially began to threaten to withdraw from the peace process.
I'm not here to please them. On a personal level, I get along well with them. But I'm more interested in the well-being of the people of the United States. They're the ones I work for. I don't work for France, Germany, Japan, or others, even though they're all wonderful people. We are constantly being asked for help in the war in Ukraine, and we have more resources than any other country in the world. But when the United States needed help, they didn't get any. Some European leaders said that the war in Iran was not their war. The war in Ukraine is not our war either. But we still made a significant contribution.
It's clear what Rubio is doing when he knows perfectly well what Trump's position is and knows that Trump doesn't want to put any pressure on Putin at all, and at the first opportunity rushes to call him and ask for help. Rubio has to make excuses. It's unpleasant for him, but he might think that the White House is worth the trouble. That's basically been his position over the past year. In
Russia, they immediately started to chime in and declared that the US is not putting enough pressure on Ukraine, and that it's the Ukrainians who are to blame for the fact that the war is still...
The situation is currently in progress and is continuing to develop steadily as we move forward. So we are monitoring all the latest updates and changes as they happen in real time. As long as they are not implemented.
Rubio also had a conflict with the Ukrainian president. Zelensky stated that the Americans are demanding that Ukraine withdraw from Donbas in exchange for security guarantees.
If today an ultimatum is being voiced in Russia that it will end the war, only after the withdrawal of Ukrainian armed forces from the entire territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And if this ultimatum is being voiced and the American side says that after Russia ends the war, we will give you guarantees. Otherwise, we will not give you any guarantees. People may have different opinions about this, but all the signals throughout the entire negotiation process indicate, and this is not just my analysis, it is stated quite directly, that we will be able to receive security guarantees from the United States of America. Not before the ceasefire, not before the end of the war, but after our troops withdraw from Donbas.
The US Secretary of State was outraged, claiming that the president of Ukraine was allegedly not telling the truth, and no one is putting pressure on anyone.
That's a lie. And I saw him say it. And it's a real shame that he said that because he knows it's not true. He was not told that. He was told the obvious. Security guarantees will not come into effect until the war is over, because otherwise you get drawn into the war. He was told very clearly, and he should have understood, that security guarantees only come into effect after the war ends. But this was not connected to him having to give up territory. I don't know why he says that. is simply not true.
Ruby interprets it this way. As you know, we're not putting pressure on them because we're not directly telling them to withdraw troops from the Donetsk region. We're simply conveying to them the Russian position. And Zelensky might think that when the Americans link the end of hostilities to the Russian position, they're trying to oppose it. That's pressure, isn't it? Because in theory, the Americans shouldn't be conveying this position to the Ukrainians, but rather telling the Russians that this position doesn't suit them and that they are not going to work with it. Make sense?
At the same time, it should be noted that Europe is finally becoming an independent actor and is increasingly voicing objections to the US and helping Ukraine defend its interests. Krasnodar is on fire, Ukraine's retribution has caught up with Putin, and the war has officially come to the homes of Russians. This is the collapse of Russia's rear. There are no more safe places in Russia. The dictator who started the invasion has personally opened the gates of hell for his own citizens. Panic in Russian cities. Why is this only the beginning? Watch. Russian territory is once again in turmoil.
Some kind of sound, something flying. Well, where is something flying? Man, I set up the camera just in time. What was that explosion even for? It's like, you know, it'll be a nuclear one or something. In
the Ministry of Aggression of the Russian Federation, as usual, they reported bravely. Overnight, more than 100 Ukrainian drones were shot down in 9 Russian regions, as well as over the waters of the Sea of Azov and over the temporarily occupied Crimea. How many were actually shot down is unknown, but the fact is, some got through. That's a fact. Krasnodar in particular was hit. There, one of the drones crashed into a multi-story residential building. Local authorities reported 3 people injured. The Rostov region was also awake all night. The head of the region stated that they were attacked by more than 60 drones. Taganrog was hit as well. There, as a result of falling debris, residential buildings caught fire. And once again, Russian air defense is to blame for everything. Russian air defense was operating directly over residential buildings. Local residents filmed their supposed repelling of the attack. But in the Samara region, either the air defense didn't work or, as always, it turned out to be useless. As a result, residential buildings in Tolyatti were not damaged. The same can't be said for the Kyiv Azot chemical plant, which had already been attacked on March 11th. The enterprise is among the 10 largest in Russia's nitrogen industry. And there, once again, another one got through.
Behind the building, there's more
smoke. The daily strikes on Russian cities are forcing officials to make excuses to the Russian people. On federal channels, Kremlin loyalists keep insisting that Russian air defense is the best in the world. But now they've added a new talking point. It turns out these strikes aren't scary at all and are even good for Russians.
I state with full responsibility, we have the best air defense in the world, and our air defense is the best. No one else has anything like it at all. No one has it today. And the fact that sometimes a drone manages to reach quite deep inside the country is, on the one hand, even a good thing, because we gain experience in repelling massive raids.
But even the so-called military bloggers have stopped believing the Russian officials. And after watching drones set fire to the Ust-Luga port for several days in a row, they shared a frightening suspicion.
In light of all these events, there are only 2 suspicions. If suddenly, when enemy nuclear missiles are launched at us, our air defense leaves the chat in exactly the same way, a proper retaliatory strike might not even happen because it could very well turn out that the state of the strategic missile forces is consistent with all the other structures of the Russian Ministry of Defense. In other words, they limit themselves exclusively to impressive reports. But we won't have time to find out about it anymore. By the way,
speaking of Ust-Luga, this oil terminal port continues to be hit by Ukrainian drones. For almost a week now, things have been consistently hot there. And the president of Ukraine does not hide the fact that the attacks on Ust-Luga are a response to strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And official Kyiv is even ready to stop these responses. For this, it is enough for Moscow to stop its attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
We are not just striking, we are responding. Why am I reminding you of this? In the recent period following the onset of the severe global energy crisis, we have consistently been receiving various signals and formal inquiries from several of our international partners and stakeholders, who are specifically asking for clarification on how we might begin to reduce or mitigate our current strategic responses and sanctions directed against Russia's vital oil and broader energy sectors. If Russia is ready to stop striking Ukrainian energy infrastructure, we will not retaliate against theirs.
But as long as the Kremlin hesitates, Russian territory will continue to see action and lose money. However, Ukrainian drones and missiles are unlikely to be upset if they have to keep working.
A Kremlin conspiracy, Moscow is preparing to assassinate Putin. The hunt for the dictator has begun. Who will deliver the final blow? This is the beginning of the end, an internal revolt of the elites. Those who swore loyalty yesterday are now sharpening their knives behind Putin's back. All the details of the upcoming coup, watch right now.
In Russia, there were protests against internet blockades which Putin's servants tried to suppress even before they began. Here we are.
Out for a walk, what can I say? The entire Bolotnaya Square is cordoned off, all the barriers are up. Rosgvardia units are stationed all over Moscow, checking people with large bags here.
The largest cities in Eritrea were effectively placed under heightened control, where any gathering of people was seen as a potential threat. And simply having the opportunity to go out onto the square was already grounds for detention.
Even the administration of St. Petersburg freaked out and put up barricades here. And over there are more people in uniform standing.
But even preventive detentions, cordoned off squares, and pressure from the security forces didn't stop them. Those who still dared to come out.
Hello, friends. We've been detained. I'm currently at the police station. So far, they haven't explained why.
We left the Ministry of Internal Affairs building.
With a volunteer, with Katya, right in the middle of the street, they just came up to us. Come with us. We went with them, gave a statement about putting up flyers.
At least 18 people were detained in Russia at unsanctioned protests against internet blockades. In Moscow, the rally was not authorized by the authorities. Supposedly due to COVID restrictions, it was supposed to take place on Bolotnaya Square. However, on the day of the protest, the area around it was effectively turned into a controlled zone. Security forces cordoned off the territory, selectively checked pedestrians' documents, searched personal belongings, and recorded faces on camera. Moreover, even the urban environment had been prepared in advance. Municipal services painted the benches in the nearest park, making it impossible for people to stay there for long. And any attempt to stop or gather immediately attracted the attention of the police.
The authorities did not allow protest actions to take root.
Putin's lackeys not only refused to allow rallies, but did so in the most demonstrative way possible. Even in places where permission was initially granted, the events were cancelled at the last moment. They cited formal reasons, from drone threats to suddenly scheduled events, such as roller skating master classes. At the same time, the Ministry of Internal Affairs publicly warned about possible administrative and criminal liability.
Not a single application for a rally was approved. Accordingly, they deployed so many law enforcement officers that they detained almost anyone who showed up. For the protest to take place, people at least need to be able to gather in some way. The police did not allow them to even come out in any region or to even see each other.
Detentions also took place in other cities. In St. Petersburg, Voronezh, Kaluga, Novosibirsk. The squares and parks where the rallies were planned were also cordoned off in advance. And reinforced police and OMON units were on duty at those locations.
There was an attempt to organize mass rallies across Russia. There was an attempt, and the discontent is such that despite all the restrictions, despite all the bans, people are still trying to protest against what they don't like. It's not even just about what they don't like, but it seems that now people are coming out to protest against internet blockages. To protest, to come out, more or less. It's not that it's safe, but at least you can try, because in the past almost 2 years, we haven't even seen attempts to organize any more or less mass protest actions.
But apparently depriving Russians of their usual and favorite services was not enough for the Kremlin. And now it's not just about blockages, but about a full-fledged system of punishments. In the Russian Federation, there is discussion about introducing fines for refusing to use the national messenger MAX. The proposed range of fines is extremely harsh, from 50,000 to 3 million rubles, depending on the circumstances and the nature of the refusal to use the service.
There is hope that we will introduce fines for everyone starting from September 7th of this year. We are aiming for this date, from which all Russians will be held accountable for actions directed against Max, said the channel source, according to Kremlin Tabakerka.
But it seems that what at first glance appeared to be harmless rallies could become the end of Putin's empire. As reported by the Telegram channel Kremlin Tabakerka, according to a high-ranking source in the presidential administration, it is allegedly not only activists and dissatisfied citizens behind the attempts to organize protests, but also representatives of the Russian elite themselves, whom the Kremlin increasingly refers to as internal enemies of the system.
We are aware of plans for serious protests that could become a problem for our security forces. That's why we nip everything in the bud. Right now it's working. And the organizers of these vile demonstrations will now defend the internet, then demand a quick end to the special military operation. And after that, I wouldn't rule out that they'll organize an assassination attempt on Vladimir Vladimirovich. I'm sure it's already being prepared. Ahead lie several dangerous and decisive months for the fate of Russia. We understand all the challenges and are preparing to respond in order to prevent the worst, said the channel's interlocutor, according to Kremlin Tabakerka.
Tensions in Russia are only escalating, and with each new turn it becomes increasingly clear that this is no longer just about protests against internet restrictions, but about a much deeper process. And the way the system, trained for years, is reacting only makes it clearer that behind the tough rhetoric lies fear and a desire to hold on to power at any cost.
A sensation, Putin's army is being ground to dust. March has become a true month of death for the aggressor. The casualty numbers have hit rock bottom and reached a historic high. But the most shocking thing is not this. An epidemic of self-destruction has begun among the ranks of the occupiers. Russian infantry are destroying themselves en masse without even waiting to encounter the AFU. What is this? Mass psychosis or the only way to escape from hell? Watch.
The first month of spring brought a new anti-record for the Russian army. But in March, a high rate of losses in the Russian army was recorded. In addition to the eliminations by Ukrainian soldiers at the front, there is daily video evidence showing Russian infantry resorting to self-destruction.
For 2026, this is quite a high figure. It's not high for the 25th, since in 2025 we saw the number of eliminated Russian occupiers reach 40 to 41,000. For example, in March of 2025, it was 41,160 personnel, and in December, 35,000. Nevertheless, as a starting point for the beginning of 2026, it's over 30,000. Losses of Russian occupiers' personnel in the third month. This is quite a high figure.
Most often, this happens after injuries sustained as a result of drone attacks or in situations of complete encirclement by Ukrainian drones. This was reported by Ukraine's Minister of Defense, Mikhailo Fedorov. According to him, such behavior is a consequence of decisions made by the military-political leadership of the Kremlin. In particular, Russian propaganda insists on having control and superiority over the situation. However, the real picture on the battlefield is significantly different.
The number of suicides in Russian ranks, it is only increasing. And this concerns not just suicides. In the rear area, under rear conditions, there is a large number of verified suicides, which already exceed 450. Only the verified ones, those that have been captured in photos or videos. If we take the time to talk about cases that have not yet been officially verified, even the most experienced monitoring groups and independent analysts are forced to admit that the true and actual number of these occurrences could easily be 5 times higher than reported. When compared directly to the verified number of incidents, this is a staggeringly high and significant figure. Roughly speaking, occurring about once every single day or perhaps once every 2 days, an unmanned drone captures footage of a suicide mission taking place.
In addition, according to the minister, the Russian command effectively forbids soldiers from surrendering, promoting the narrative that it is better to die immediately. At the same time, the losses of the Russian army continue to grow rapidly.
March could set a record for the number of Russians killed. The dynamics of the defeats indicate that, thanks to the Ukrainian defense forces, enemy losses will exceed 30,000 severely wounded and killed.
The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense also made an interesting announcement. They said that reaching the mark of 50,000 losses in a month could have catastrophic consequences for the Russian army. The ministry hinted at possible additional measures to intensify this trend. The Ukrainian army is also resorting to more creative methods of eliminating the enemy. Ukraine is sending insoles filled with explosives to the occupiers at the front, disguised as humanitarian aid. This was reported by Forbes. Ukrainian intelligence officers allegedly placed explosive insoles in shipments destined for Russian military units, which were transported with the help of Russian volunteers and charitable foundations, allowing them to be disguised as ordinary humanitarian aid.
Each insole contains 1.5 grams of TNT. Such a tiny charge won't destroy a vehicle or a bunker. However, if it hits a foot at close range, it can cause serious injury.
The first shipments took place in early March and may have amounted to tens of thousands of units. At the same time, it is reported that the scheme was only partially uncovered after a mistake by one of the participants. Ukrainian agents used at least one intermediary blindly. That is, this person may not have known the true nature of the cargo. This mistake, according to Militarny, helped the FSB identify one of the shipments.
Recently, the number of 200s among Russian troops has been steadily and systematically increasing. By the end of 25 and the beginning of 26, this figure was about 60 to 65% of the total monthly losses. To express this in more specific terms, the Russian military forces on the ground are losing more significant personnel killed than wounded. Although generally speaking, the standard historical and statistical ratio of killed to wounded is about 1 to 3 in most modern conflicts, 1 killed on average to 3 wounded.
The Ukrainian president also made an interesting statement about Russian losses. According to the head of state, the current ratio of Ukrainian to Russian military losses is about 1 to 8, in Ukraine's favor. Zelensky noted that at the beginning of the full-scale war, this ratio was much lower, about 1 to 3.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Russia's gasoline crisis is here. The Kremlin is closing borders and zeroing exports. Gas stations are failing. The energy superpower is out of fuel. The Russian government is now banning gasoline exports. What awaits Russia next? Watch. On the brink of collapse, Putin's Russia is getting closer to crisis. The Kremlin is officially imposing a complete ban on the export of automotive gasoline for all market participants.
These are all the results of their work.
The restrictions come into effect on April 1st and will last for at least 4 months.
By taking this approach, the overall situation will become much calmer. The cost of living will be significantly cheaper, and it will be possible to create far more favorable conditions for future economic development.
This decision was made after an emergency meeting of representatives of the oil industry, where they officially confirmed a critical shortage of fuel within the country. The main goal of the restrictions was to protect domestic consumers and attempt to stop the rapid rise in prices at gas stations. In fact, the industry admitted that it is unable to simultaneously fulfill export contracts and meet the needs of its own market under conditions of production shortages.
Before Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, the export of petroleum products, primarily gasoline, brought Russia $75 billion a year. Well, as we can clearly see from recent events, the Russian Federation has consistently and repeatedly made the decision to refuse to export gasoline and other petroleum products lately. This is primarily because there is both a substantial physical shortage of these essential resources within their borders and a total inability to fully export them due to the extensive damage sustained by Russia's very own critical logistical port facilities and infrastructure used for the complex process of shipping this vital fuel to international markets abroad.
The ban on gasoline exports followed a series of drone attacks on oil refineries, as a result of which at least 3 of them stopped producing fuel, including 2 just in the past week. Moreover, many plants cannot resume operations due to sanctions on Western equipment.
The amount of gasoline in Russia, let's put it this way, has decreased and export opportunities have diminished. Russia, of course, won't say that it can't export as much gasoline as before because Ukraine is carrying out strikes. In Russia, they generally try not to acknowledge such things. That's why officially they say that a ban on gasoline exports is being introduced because it is justified. There really is a gasoline shortage. So there you have it. This is why we're exporting less, because we've banned exports.
During 2025, Ukraine's defense forces carried out more than 140 attacks on oil refineries and oil depots in Russia. According to calculations by Reuters, about 40% of Russia's oil export capacity was halted last week, which became the most serious disruption in the supply of black gold in the modern history of Putin's country.
Here, this serves as a form of indirect but clear confirmation that the strikes being carried out are indeed by the specialized security services of Ukraine. But for those individuals carrying them out, they are proving to be highly effective. The Russian authorities do not acknowledge this reality verbally, but in practice they have implemented a formal ban on the export of fuel products. That is to say, the impact is undeniable.
Foreign currency revenues amounting to billions of dollars have come under threat since gasoline exports are one of the key sources of budget income. Now, these strategic financial flows are effectively blocked due to the imposed embargo.
Russia is under-earning from the export of petroleum products, which, while not as lucrative as raw resources, still used to bring in money. By resources, I mean oil and gas, but these also used to generate revenue. So here too, there will obviously be losses. $75 billion was the figure before the full-scale war. But during the war, Russia was selling about 47 to 49, up to $50 billion a year. Petroleum products? So there you have it, an approximate amount of lost revenue if such a ban continues until the end of the year.
The Kremlin is sacrificing the profits of oil giants to appease small businesses and the population, preventing a fuel crisis under martial law and amid attacks on infrastructure.
The pressure that the Russian authorities are putting on businesses can have a very negative effect when businesses simply start saying that they are shutting down. And this trend is also present in the Russian economy. And if businesses are shutting down, if there are fewer and fewer enterprises, the tax base shrinks, and that could be even worse for the budget. So here, this is called the multiplication of not so good scenarios, the multiplication of situations where you can't find a good answer and are constantly forced to choose between bad options.
A ban on gasoline exports was already introduced in Russia in August of last year, when Ukrainian drone attacks knocked out about 15% of refinery capacity, and it was lifted on January 31st. It is expected that if the situation with the restoration of oil refineries does not improve in the near future, the export ban could be extended beyond July 2026.
The economy cannot withstand this war, and Russia may increasingly lean toward the scenario of Germany in the First World War, when Berlin was never captured, there were no military actions on German territory, yet Germany capitulated. Because there was no way to ensure a normal economic life in the country. Now, Russia is very close to this stage. The second question is when exactly it will reach this crisis state. People are already saying that it will happen this year, but closer to its end or...
Karavadum, a Ukrainian aerial strike. Ukrainian flamingos burned down a secret factory. The skies over Russia have been officially seized. A mighty heavenly retribution has struck the aggressor. Ukrainian drone killers stirred up total chaos right in the heart of Putin's defense industry. The corridor of death. Atesh partisans wiped out the Russian air defenses. Details to follow.
Ukrainian flamingos dominate the Russian skies. The Kremlin is running out of air defense resources.
You could see as if something was flying from over there and towards the factory. The strike came from somewhere over there.
Oil ports, defense industry facilities and refineries are under daily missile and drone attacks. All forces have been thrown into protecting the dictator, his palaces and residences, and also Moscow. There aren't enough air defense resources even for Putin's hometown, St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region. Meanwhile, the flamingos are striking at over 1,000 kilometers away, deep inside Russia, at military-industrial complex factories in Chapayevsk. Hundreds of drones reach Russia's northern capital every day.
The longer the war goes on, as you can see, the level of armament of the armed forces of Ukraine is rising even higher. Therefore, as they say, the longer the war lasts, the more losses Russia will suffer.
Ukraine is focusing on the powerful oil infrastructure of the Leningrad region. In recent days, the Kirishi oil refinery, the ports of Primorsk and Ust-Luga, as well as the Slavneft refinery, have come under attack in the Yaroslavl region. According to experts, about 30% of all Russian oil passes through these four facilities.
The destruction of depots, the disruption of logistics routes, that is, strikes on. These include critically important strategic transport hubs and major seaports. And in addition, we are seeing strikes on various key enterprises within the defense industry sector. This is a necessary measure, as a matter of fact, because many of them are now well within the operational striking range of even our simplest drones. And strikes on enterprises of the fuel sector. That is, fuel producers, and as is well known, oil is the blood of war.
On Goebbels TV, for lack of any reasonable explanation of what's happening, they invent fables about Ukrainian drone dominance in the Russian rear. Clever plans, training of personnel.
I state with full responsibility, we have the best air defense in the world, and our air defense is the best. No one else has it at all. It simply doesn't exist today. And the fact that sometimes a drone manages to reach quite deep somewhere, in a way that's even good because we gain experience in repelling massive raids.
In reality, Kyiv's success in aerial attacks on Russian territory is determined by several factors at once. First, the effective hunting by the Ukrainian armed forces using Medstrike drones against the enemy's air defense systems. Second, sabotage by Ukrainian partisans in the Russian rear. For example, in the second half of March, the Atish movement burned several key Russian electronic warfare units that were interfering with the drone routes. The economic aspect is no less important when it comes to strikes on Russia. The Kremlin's defensive measures, whether it's carpets in airports or shutting off the internet in villages and cities, hit the wallets and comfortable lives of millions of Russians.
Regardless of the final outcome, whether the drone reaches its pre-selected target or not, the Russian economy suffers enormous losses. In the near future,
ballistic missiles will also join in the strikes on Russian territory. There will be plenty of work for the Ukrainian equivalent of ATACMS.
That's all for now. And for more fiery news from the front, tune in to the next episode.